If you have a few stubborn cuttings at home that are refusing to shoot out roots, or you're new to the plant parenting world and you just want to learn how to propagate your plants into a thriving indoor garden, then this video is for you. When I initially planned this video, it was going to be a bit of a tutorial on how to get your cuttings to root, or begin to root. Because as you can see, this cutting is actually starting to degrade a bit. Actually, not just a bit, quite a lot. You can see the yellowing on the leaves and the tips are starting to brown quite badly. And in all honesty, I was about to give up on this cutting that I'd purchased from another plant parent and literally just do one last ditch effort. But as I was planning out the video, I had a quick look at it and lo and behold, it started to root. I hope you can see that. But that's okay, later on in this video I'll take you in for a closer look. Now, any plant parent will know the excitement I experienced when I discovered those roots, because I purchased this in July and we're currently now in December. So I've been trying to get this cutting to root for a good 5 to 6 months now. So this video is going to be about all the different techniques that I have tried and attempted to use on getting this guy to start rooting. And these will be techniques that you can use to try and propagate your houseplants at home. So this cutting, even though it's looking a bit worse for wear, is actually an Epipremnum pinnatum dragon's tail. But Epipremnum pinnatum dragon's tail is a bit of a mouthful, so I'm going to refer to this as purely the dragon's tail cutting. This here is actually Epipremnum pinnatum, but it isn't a dragon's tail variety. And you can tell by comparing their leaves, because this leaf tapers more like a pointed arrow, whereas this one is just more like a standard leaf. Personally, this plant has been on my wish list for a while, and any plant parent will appreciate that I was extremely keen to get this guy rooted so that I can create my own beautiful dragon's tail plant. So, if you have a few stubborn cuttings sitting at home refusing to produce roots, make sure you stick around to the end of this video, because I'm going to pass on a piece of advice that the plant parent that I purchased this beautiful cutting from told me, because it literally changed the approach that I take with propagating water cuttings. Now let's give you guys a closer look at this cutting and discuss the different techniques to try and get your cuttings to produce roots. Okay, so here we are for a closer inspection of the beautiful dragon's tail cutting that I've got here currently rooting. You can see that it has currently developed 2 roots that are reaching into the water, and it's also developing another root here. Now, having a bit of a closer inspection on the condition of the plant, you can see that the leaf is actually starting to fade quite badly. When I started to see these signs, I really lost a lot of hope for this and I thought I was going to lose it. So thankfully, this new node has activated so that now this leaf will be able to support the entire cutting. I'll leave this leaf on for now, just because it'll get as much as it can out of this leaf, and then fingers crossed we actually start seeing this leaf open up so that it can photosynthesize and deliver energy to the new roots. Now, before we get into the different techniques that you can use to propagate cuttings in water, I want to emphasize one very important point, and that is there is no one cookie cutter strategy that is guaranteed to work for every cutting every time. Each plant will have its own nuances. At the same time, each cutting will have its own nuances. So some will work and some won't work with the same strategy from the same plant. And that's just how it goes in the plant world. Trust me, I've tried to come up with a foolproof water propagation technique and I haven't yet been able to achieve that. So if you have one, drop a comment below, let us know your techniques, because that's what's great about this whole plant parenting community. We share our knowledge and hope to improve each other's skills. At the very beginning, when I purchased this beautiful cutting from a fellow plant parent, I made sure the leaf looked healthy and vibrant, and that there was plenty of stem and positive signs that there was enough sustenance within the cutting to support plenty of root growth. This stem was actually a lot longer and it actually had a beautiful aerial root coming off. But since then you can see that this aerial root has rotted, and I've had to subsequently cut off the parts of the stem just because it started signs of showing rot. Now, the very first technique that I'll discuss for water propagation is a very simple technique, which is grabbing a container and filling it up with filtered water. Now, This is probably the most obvious choice and one that you're probably trying there at home. Now, the important points to note for propagating in a container of water is I like to use a glass jar, because a glass jar allows you to observe the cutting, observe the quality of the water, and see if there's any roots growing, which is the exciting part of propagation. Now you'll see that I'm doing a water propagation of my beautiful Philodendron Brazil in a glass jar as well, just using the simple techniques of filling it with water, and you can see that the roots are thriving in there. And it's actually shooting off plenty of new growth. So obviously this technique worked well for the Philodendron, but in the beginning, when I first received the beautiful dragon's tail, it was doing nada, absolutely zilch. So after the lack of activity that this dragon's tail was showing me, I decided to try the cutting in LECA. One other point I forgot to mention when you're propagating in a container of water is that you need to be changing out the water at least once a week, if not twice a week. And there are a couple of reasons why you want to change out the water on a consistent basis. And the first is oxygenation of the roots. Believe it or not, roots require oxygen, and the roots receive oxygen directly from the water. So you need to be changing out the water at least once, if not twice a week, to be able to deliver the necessary oxygen to your cutting. The other important reason for changing out the water is to avoid any disease development. You want to try and clean out the bottle as best you can, because that'll remove any bacteria that might be in the jar itself. But after about a month or so of inactivity from this cutting, I decided to try my hand at a few different other techniques. And the next one I tried was LECA balls, or clay aggregate balls. Now for those plant parents that are new to this space, LECA, which is spelled L-E-C-A, which are these lightweight balls of clay, are fantastic for the gardening world. I love to use them in my potting mixes, as well as using them in my hydroponic plants. If you follow the channel, you'll know that I use these in my air garden, and all the plants there thrive in it. So basically, they're this lightweight clay balls that are fantastic at trapping air inside, so that it provides oxygen for the plants, especially in hydroponics. So when you're using LECA balls for water propagation purposes, what you want to do, fill up your container, or jar in this case, with hydrogen balls up until where the cutting starts. And actually, when the aerial root was still attached and it hadn't rotted, I had it poking into the LECA ball, and you fill the water level up to the top of the LECA balls. And what happens is the LECA balls actually have the ability to absorb and retain water, which will create the perfect environment for the cutting to start shooting out roots. But unfortunately, the LECA balls did not stick and did not encourage any of the root growth from my dragon's tail cutting. So at this point, my hopes for this cutting were starting to fade. And after trying it with LECA, I could actually see the tips developing all these brown and spots, and I was getting a bit desperate. So I reached out to the plant parent that I purchased the cutting from, and I asked if she had any other suggestions or advice for the next steps that I should take. And as with most of the other plant parents that I've come across in my community, she came forth with plenty of advice and encouragement. And it's the type of attitude that we love to encourage at the Garden Benchtop. So in my third attempt of getting this cutting to root, I sent back a picture of the cutting, and she actually suggested a technique that I've never tried before. It was to cut off the tip of the aerial root and also scrape off a part of the surface of the aerial root at a particular point. And the purpose of that was to try and stimulate the root growth. I also informed her that I tried the LECA approach, but it just wasn't working. So she suggested that I go back to water propagation in just a container and some fresh filtered water, but this time just add in a touch of fertilizer that she uses with the mother plant and that she finds helps to stimulate root growth. So that was a third attempt at trying to get this cutting to root, and I let it be for a good 2 to 3 months after that. Now, complete transparency, I had pretty much given up on this cutting. In addition, after about the 4-month mark of trying to get this guy to root, the aerial root had rotted to the point where I needed to get rid of it. The stem itself looked quite sickly. As you can see, it's all black. But amongst all the negative signs that this cutting was showing, this little node actually started to grow. And as I explained at the beginning of this video, I was planning on giving this guy one final attempt, and that was to place it in some damp sphagnum moss and dip the end into some rooting powder to stimulate the hormones for the root growth. But to my surprise, as the growth node was growing, it started to shoot out roots. It just goes to show, never give up on your cuttings. If there's still at least one positive sign, which in my case was the growing node, keep at it. Now this guy does have a long way to go. It's definitely not out of the woods. I need these roots to grow at least to 3 to 4 inches long and develop secondary roots, which means roots growing off the main roots, before I'll even consider moving this to any kind of soil-based home. Now, if you've managed to watch this entire video all the way through to this point, thank you. And as I promised at the beginning of this video, here's that piece of advice that my fellow plant parent dropped as she was explaining the way that she gets all her cuttings to root. And that is, in all the different techniques that I've explained through this video, the main goal that you're trying to achieve is to stimulate root growth. And that's the important point that you need to take away from this video. When you're setting the water level for the water propagation, you want it to be almost just out of reach where the roots are growing, because that will encourage the roots to shoot out and extend into the water so that it can get the moisture and oxygen that it needs. The same goes with propagating in LECA or in sphagnum moss. The goal is to have your cutting in a humid, moist environment so that all the water in the ambient air stimulates the root growth to grow. And we want this cutting to develop a root system that will be able to sustain itself. This was the main driver behind the plant parent's suggestion to start cutting off the aerial root, parts of the aerial root, and scraping the surface, because that allows the moisture in the air to stimulate that root growth and it will start to develop. So I hope you've been able to take away some key tips in water propagation. As we always say at the Garden Benchtop, go get your hands dirty. See ya.